ID series today. This is the first ID series of the new fiscal year, so thank you so much. We have a captivating topic today. Dr. Galloway will demonstrate how a user-led process aiming at improving mobility devices is revolutionizing rehab technology. So this is super exciting. Before I introduce our speaker, let me go over some housekeeping issues. As usual, CME credits are available for our Tech Talks and ID series presentations. We will distribute the information via email to those that registered for today's event, or you can obtain the information for Deborah Rees at Questionnaire Care. Her email address will be in the chat box. Our next Tech Talk will be on Thursday, August 4th by Shanshan Ding, also from University of Delaware, and she will talk about dimension reduction and robust non-parametric method for high-dimensional survival data with applications to cancer genomic studies. So please do not miss this very fascinating Tech Talk. So again, I am really excited to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Galloway is currently full professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at University of Delaware and the director of the Mobility Lab and Studio Design. He is a founder of Go Baby Go, a network of now more than 150 chapters that he created to study mobility technology for children and adults with significant mobility issues. He obtained a PhD in physiological sciences, neuromotor control at University of Arizona in Tucson, and after his PhD, he became a postdoctoral fellow in developmental psychology at Indiana University in the Department of Psychology in Bloomington. He has had multiple awards, the last one in 2020 by the American Physical Therapy Association for National Societal Impact, and has been extensively funded by NIH, NSF, foundations such as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Smithsonian's American History Museum, the American Physical Therapy Association, as well as funding from medical and toy industries such as Permobil and Fisher-Price. He also has multiple peer-reviewed publications and is a very sought-after speaker all over the country and the world. But most importantly, he's an advocate and an activist for people with decreased mobility, both children and adults. So thank you so much, Dr. Galloway, and we are so excited to have you here.
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I like most that you said, but above all, he's an activist, an advocate. That really sums up my transition over the last couple of years. That makes me smile, but you got it right. That's really
good.
That's really fabulous. And to be a federally funded researcher along with that has been super fun. So I see multiple people on. I'm looking mainly at my screen, and I see little blue boxes that represent each of you humans out there. So I'm going to keep in mind that you're actually out there. And yeah, this is great. Thanks so much for the organizers. They made it super easy to participate. A quick thank you to these organizations, some of which you may recognize. I know we have a mixed group of all kinds of flavored folks, which is awesome. You may recognize NIH and NSF, of course. Robert Wood Johnson is the largest non-federal funder of disruptive healthcare. If you're into stuff that you hear today, check out Robert Wood Johnson for training for your students and yourself, and for really pilot, preliminary, or full-blown projects that want to disrupt healthcare. So today's title this is the first time I've given this kind of talk. It's kind of a Frankenstein version of multiple talks. Thank you for allowing me to sort of improv and work out a new gig, if you will. It's increasing the significance and innovation, or significance and impact, if another I word, of healthcare R&D process. And the interesting case of rehab devices, where I spend most of my time. I assume I'm talking to a specific kind of audience, and I found it helpful to tell you who I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to folks that feel like the healthcare system is broken in the US, if not around the world, that they feel part of that system, and they feel that if they actively stop participating and start doing things differently, then they can change the system. And I want to acknowledge the Fed, which is a community organizing group that I co-organize with Gene Minkle in New York. It's the Federation of Citizens for Mobility Equity, especially Brooklyn and Hudson Valley. This is where I spend most of my non-research time hanging out and learning from individuals across the lifespan about what it is to be mobile in the community with technology. And I acknowledge them not just because their ideas have permeated into me, but really for rescuing me away from a highly significant and innovative career that had minimal impact. So I want to skip to dessert first for you guys that love dessert, which I do. Let's talk about the dessert first. Let's talk about some actions that, and then we'll get to some of the fun of the process. Some take-home actions at the personal, professional level. Number one, spend your own time and resources to become a community organizer. If you don't know what community organizing really is, there's a wealth of information. Also, for any of this, contact me. I'd love to chat with individuals or groups about how to actually do this boots on the ground. How I've done it. A person that was very disconnected from community impact and yet was told by academic, medical, and research communities that I was having impact. So if you don't know what community organizing is, there's a lot of resources online. There's even free courses out of the University of Michigan, for example. It takes about 5 or 6 hours. It's outstanding launching pad for what community organizing really means. No need to quit your day job. This is actually mixing the community organizing principles into your day job and helping transform it. If you hire people into positions of power, hire individuals with lived experiences, aka we'll call them just individuals here for brevity, and their caregivers. So if you're at the end, if you're asking, usually I get asked, how do we do what you did? How do we have that change in my area of research or development or clinical practice or education and academics, medical physician or therapist? How do you do that? Hire people with lived experiences in you. If you're a cancer physician, hire people that have survived or have cancer and their caregivers. That's the way you're going to change the level of impact ultimately. Along the same lines, spend your social time with individuals and their caregivers. AKA, you remember friendships from outside of work? That's what we're talking about. Become friends with individuals in your professional area of interest in healthcare. And a reminder, friendships aren't built in clinics and labs. Don't tell me that you know stroke survivors because you see them in the lab or in the clinic, or as you have friendships that you've made in the clinic. Those are acquaintances or colleagues, but they're not friendships. Friendships don't come with that kind of financial and healthcare power differential. And we can talk a little bit about that if you're interested later. Take-home messages in terms of professional. What can I do in terms of if you're in the R&D game or for research and development, it's so multifactorial that many of you, if you're clinicians or educators, you also can participate in R&D, and you probably already do. But act up or exit those R&D processes that are not user-led. I'm not talking about Stanford Design School empathy at the first stage of the design process. I'm talking about choosing what you do based on your boss, which is an individual with the lived experience in their caregiver. That is something I never did in 25 years of federal funded work. I never ever had a person in my lab in a position of power, all the way down to a position of volunteer in my lab that had a mobility lived experience. And I got federally funded. I got promoted with relative ease. I was often brought up as a golden child with Go Baby Go, and no one ever asked me, but you don't have a mobility challenge. How do you make decisions? I make decisions based on literature and based on study sections, but I didn't embed myself with user-led power, and that's on me. Act up to include individuals in positions of power in federal policy and R&D funding. For example, study sections at NIH should have individuals with lived experiences, and program chairs should also be those individuals. Caution, don't tell me that advisory boards or disability-related associations are proxies for individuals in leadership. Oftentimes advisory boards have token individuals with disabilities. Often those individuals, I'll just go ahead and talk intersectionality, are white, cisgendered, hetero males, spinal cord injured. That's wonderful if that's your intersectional social identities, but that does not give you enough depth and breadth to represent much of disability community. And that's not just me talking. I'm a vessel for the disability community that's really educated me. Disability-related associations, I used to also think, are advocates. And I've learned that we all need to learn more about disability-related associations and the nonprofit game and who runs these and what their focus is. Adopt disability justice principles. If disability justice as a term is new to you, congratulations. Go and take a look at these principles. If disability rights make sense, or you've heard that, these two things are together, but they're different. Disability rights tends to focus, or it focuses on trying to elevate equity, inclusion, and diversity through the legal system. Disability justice is about cultural change. And think about all other marginalized and oppressed populations. You need both. And now disability justice is a very strong level of principles. And I just listed these here. Most of these will not just intuitively connect to the research and development pipeline and all the things from design to implementation. But once you pick these out, and there are lots of resources that give you detailed, you can take courses in this now, detailed understanding of each of these, you can understand how elevating your lab, your clinic, your personal academic or clinical career to include these, really powerful and new for us in the able-bodied community and for many people in disability community as well. Take-home policies, take-home actions in the policy realm. Learn about fair pay for home care. When I first was co-organizing the FED, the Federation for Citizens for Mobility Equity, Jean and I both came with an R&D focus on we were going to learn to do better technology. And we still, a year and a half later, are not talking directly about wheels and motors and sizes of seats. We're talking about technology and mobility from a user perspective, and home care services, professional home care services, are directly related to mobility technology. That's another whole talk. But learn about the in-the-home rule restriction for mobility technology. Center for the CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, specifically limits mobility technology, wheelchairs, for example, to in-the-home use. If you need something for outside of the home, that has been written out. That's a change over the last 15 to 20 years. We've actually regressed, and there's some active ability. That really restricts, if you're a designer or a researcher, you want, the policies along the way and at the end in terms of distribution and funding not to be a barrier. You have a great technology. You don't want funding at the end to be the big barrier to get your great, significant, and user-led device out there. And so I'm learning over the last year and a half the power of policy. I thought policy and nerds went together, and they do, but these nerds are nerd warriors, and I have a brand new respect for policy and the power of policy. That's a disability rights thing. Disability justice is about changing culture such that policy actually doesn't have to be made. It comes from a cultural standpoint. There's instant intersection there. HELP, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which many of you, if you're a clinician, know a lot about. If you're a researcher like myself, there's no need to know these things, except if you're wanting to have impact. Help CMS become a user-led agency with user-first policies. Currently, if you ask CMS what their job is, they protect the trust, meaning they protect the largely able-bodied tax base that they're awarded. So they actually look when a clinician, and I think there's a couple of clinicians on our meeting today, when you get a denial for a piece of equipment, CMS has the ability to place that denial in the fraud category. And so they may look at the number of attempts of fraud and count your denial as an attempt on fraud. Not that it's a direct challenge to your practice, abilities, your practice, your license, for example. But it was a shock to me to find out that those denials, which are often overturned if the clinician really pushes hard, is considered a fraudulent act. Sort of weird. Learn how to reduce the long-term use of any constraints of mobility. You may be surprised if you saw the number of young kids that were in strollers passively for years, and these are kids that may be able to use powered mobility. So this is just taken from my abstract. In this seminar, we're going to use powered mobility devices as a model for a user-led process. So just, I don't have a really easy way to do this, but just what is this when you look at that? And I think most people, when they look at that picture, would go, well, that's a child in a wheelchair. Perfect. That's a child in a wheelchair. That's a power chair. Exact. This is actually about 15 or 20 years old. This is a advertising snapshot from Permobil, one of the leaders of the industry in power wheelchairs. So let's start on the talk. This isn't this kind of talk. This is going to be more of this kind of talk. And the fact that R&D needs a user-led process. That's to hopefully wake you up a little bit and to remind you that, and remind myself that I don't want to give an academic talk. I want to give a fun talk. So we're going to use an inside to outside view as well as an outside to inside view. If you've been around the game of clinical or research, R&D, you're a practitioner or a clinician, of any length of time, you know the importance of working within the system and also bucking the system. And that's what we're doing. When people ask me what I do, I have a difficult time saying that. I am a professor, yes. I'm a funded researcher, yes. But I feel more like a community mobility organizer or some type of neuroscience activist. The left-hand shot down below is, I hope you will, it's sad, but I think that you will find that you and I are both trapped in multiple cultures and that these cultures can be barriers to impact. For example, I'm trapped in research culture, academic culture, and medical culture. And I have to get out of all three of those and get into the community to actually have impact. And for example, if I find something research-wise, I can purport that that's innovative if I stay within the research realm. If this was all researchers, we could all nerd out on developmental psychology and baby cognition, for example, and I could tell you about a study that I'm doing that's innovative. If you're outside that field, you may go, that doesn't sound innovative at all. That sounds like duh. That may be incremental. So I believe I have to break the bounds and work from outside of three different cultures while working inside those two. So innovation is typically, in my mind, judged from outside one's field. Inside the field, it's very hard to judge whether something's innovative or not. Something that's innovative for the inventor does not equal impact for the user. That's an academic and clinical principle, I think, that needs to be shouted. Is just because your dean, your chair, yourself, your president of the university, NIH believes that you have an innovation, that does not mean that there's some trickle-down process that leads to impact for the user. And I've seen that the last year or two in a shocking way. This is where I thought I was being innovative and impactful and found out I'm actually not. It's not that I was a bad person. I just didn't know what I needed to know. On the engineering side, I think for all of us, new, cool, and smart does not equal impact. Expert status, funding, tenure, promotion does not equal impact. So what, I'm a full professor, and so what, I've had federal funding, and so what, go baby go, and so what, all those things. Ask the user downstream, ask a mom, ask a kid, do they have my technology, does it work? And can you be honest with me enough to tell me it doesn't? So one concept is the designer to user distance. This is especially important in the disability community. If you think that you're caring for the disability community by technology or clinical practice, are you part of that group? If you are not part of that group, you have to go through community organizing. This is a new realization sort of brought on by the justice equity boom right now. Hopefully this won't be a short-lived boom. But I'm not a kid. I'm not immobile. I don't participate in the disability community. I don't caregive for people with mobility impairments. I have all these nots. And that results in me having to partner with the community because I have a niche role here. The user is an inhabitant on the island, sort of dating myself with TV. I have to be voted on or off the island. clinicians, has to be voted on or off the island. The user lives there full time. I'm going to skip through. I could give an R&D talk about process, which that can be summed up as here's the traditional and here's the reality. Here's the straightforward and here's the messy. Well, that's everything. That's my life. If you're a parent and I'm a parent, this is your life. If you're not a parent, you're probably much more closer to this, but probably most days are like this. So let's don't talk about being traditional versus better. Let's go and talk specific devices. Bottom left hand is a power wheelchair for a child. The middle is an exoskeleton, and I'll talk a little bit about Michelle Lobo's work briefly. And the bottom right is a harness system over a treadmill. And this is the part on the show where I remind you, hang on one second. I'll be right back. My dog just got loose, and I'm afraid he's going to get into the street. Hang on one second. I'll be back. Oh, you're out. Okay. All right, that was the first. Okay, so power wheelchair, exoskeleton, and bodyweight supported treadmill training. This is the time that reminds me to tell you that I can sum up the R&D process for pediatric powered mobility devices, whether it's a wheelchair or even a device that doesn't necessarily do participatory increases, but like a treadmill that's more of a rehabilitative technology. It's two parts. You shrink it, because kids are smaller, and you pink it, meaning you make it a color. On the bottom right hand, they didn't even pink it, they just left it drab gray. So that's the biggest problem we have right now from the designer's standpoint. Not necessarily the user, but designer. At this middle picture of the exoskeleton, I have to tell a story that I tell all the time that involves Martha Hall, Dr. Hall, who's at the University of Delaware. When she was just a wee master's student, and one of her first days around me in the lab, before she went off with Michelle Lobo and became famous with her and Michelle, is she looked at some of the exoskeletons we were working with, and from her fashion eye said, well, why do you put technology on people you purport to care about that you wouldn't be caught dead in? And I had written about stigma. I had purported to understand design aesthetics, but that hit me right between the eyes. And at that crossroads, I think when you get that kind of feedback delivered so eloquently and surgically, I think you can either say, well, you don't understand, Martha, you don't understand that adult phrase of you don't understand, which typically means there are barriers that I don't really want to jump over. You've got to understand how I got here. Or you can say, you're exactly right. You may never leave. You're going to be here forever. And that's what we kind of did. And Martha's still here, thank goodness. But that was a shock to me. And I've had a series of shocks like that. And that came because she was looking at it more from a community fashion perspective. And that was really a bellwether moment for me. So these are the technologies that are traditionally seen. These are the technologies that we pit up against those traditional. We have a bottom left is the Wild Thing from Fisher-Price. There's Michelle's and her colleagues' play skin lift. And there's Andrew when he was a wee man. But that's not when he kicked the soccer ball through the window, but he did. And that's an in-home. Banged into his ceiling. Let's talk about the crisis with some examples. First, why do I do the technology I do? From a scientific standpoint, it's very easy to build a brain, to rebuild a brain. You need an enriched environment. We need to be in that enriched cage, not on the left-hand side in the standard cage. Take a look at most physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, rehabilitation hospitals, and you tell me which looks similar. Does it look like a standard cage or an enriched cage? I would argue most look like standard cages, meaning most, especially for pediatrics, most kids that are in rehab are not playing with their neurotypical peers in rehab. So this just reminds you very, very quickly about where the technology I work with has to perform. This is just one of those environments. It also reminds me to remind you about the key role of mobility in life. Okay, now I'll take you from that big view of mobility down to where I spend lots of time, which is with these monkeys. If you're not familiar, these are 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds. I'm typically dealing with birth to 5. If you ever had a day like this, maybe you're having a day like this right now. You finally figured out how to do it, and everybody leaves. So they're awfully cute and they're awfully mobile. And that right-hand graph, the blue, shows that like 75% of the time, typically, no matter what you're doing during the day at the Early Learning Center across campus, you're doing it with other peers. If we have occupational therapy folks or PTs or clinicians that are specifically focused on participation level or community, they would go, duh, that's what we've been screaming at you all for decades. Participation in the community is not only the end result, but it's the way you build a brain. If I can get a child or an adult into the community, actively mobile, participating and having a purpose, I know good things are going to happen. If I can't do that, I don't know of any surgical or pharmacological or in-clinic technique that's going to approximate any of that. So for my babies and birth to 5 kids in general, I need to know the design specifics. This isn't always considered in the first of the pipeline of design and research, but because I know I need to get you into the enriched environment, that starts to set design criteria. It doesn't start with the literature necessarily, it starts with the reality of what I have to provide. I need to do that so that you can keep up with peers. Well, how much movement are peers, the neurotypical peers that I want you to keep up with? How fast and strong do you have to be, so to speak, to catch that train in the bottom left? Crawling babies, it starts to get pretty aggressive, 20% of every hour. 20% of every hour crawling babies will crawl. In general, walking babies can spend up to a third of an hour every waking hour walking. And toddlers are just aggressive learners. We all know that if you have a toddler, have had a toddler in the household, you know that look of complete fatigue. And yes, mobility is great, Cole, but it's crushing every other aspect of my world. They're seek and destroy at their very best. That's 10,000 steps. That's a mile or 2 for a toddler's legs. And that's 80% of waking hours. That's across the globe for every culture that we know about. Toddlers that are 2 and 3 years old, if they're allowed to move, they move about 80% of every waking hour. That is an almost unattainable bar for the kiddos I work with. We start to late in our interventions. Our technologies are woefully backward, and that right there is the career or 4 careers. And the urgency is there are kids right now sitting as I talk. So I better make some impact with this talk, or I'm wasting your time, my time, and their time. So let's talk a little bit about design specs that come from the community, come from a user-centered. It's not user-led because I haven't figured out, outside of babies using prototypes as soon as possible, how I can get 2 and 3-year-olds to PI a NIH grant, but we're working on it. And I just want to highlight that. The way that I can get kids to participate and lead this process is to very quickly prototype and get out into the community and get real use data. Not forced use data, but real use data. Does it fit the family dynamic? So the design specs for social mobility are, again, fairly easy. They actually don't take a lot of study. Get it to me as soon as possible because I'm growing coal. And this is for kids or adults. It needs to support every behavior which I use for mobility. I need to go everywhere. That's right there for engineers is a deal breaker. That is very NASA level. That's getting ready to go to Mars, right? That's ready to be mobile on another planet everywhere. It needs to be for everyone. That's access. It can't be so high tech or not picked up by funding that you never get there. It needs to be with everyone. It's got to be social. That's another whole design thing. And I need to be able to use it as much as possible, and it has to be ready to be used at all times. When you're talking to engineers and designers or industry folks, this is overwhelming. This really is a NASA level problem. And just a very quick tangent that I think is really good example is there's a thing in Europe I hear called a particle accelerator. I don't know anything about physics very much outside of biomechanics, and I don't know what the particle accelerator really does, but I know it's a huge tool that spans multiple countries. It has lots of sophisticated and intelligent people. If a physicist today, unfortunately, had a stroke, the next day that they start rehab, they will go from working on the world's most sophisticated tool to working on, in general, with technology that's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. That's a mistake that we've done. We've cared more about the heavens and the stars and Mars than we've cared about Miss Jones or Baby Jones and community reentry. We need to change that. So back again to this. What is this? And I guess if you want to take your mics off mute and just tell me what jumps out about. We already said it's the power chair for a kid. What jumps out at you about this ad from an industry that does R&D and distribution of power wheelchairs? Just take a second. You can just don't need to raise your hand. Just unmute and just say what you notice.
The stairs are going to be inaccessible.
Okay, who said that? Can you just say who you are?
I'm Suzanne McCann.
Okay, Suzanne. Suzanne has a big old brain, and she spends time with people with disabilities, I think, because most people either go, hey, those physicians have jeans on, which is weird. It's kind of cool, though, right? Or those people on the left-hand side should be bending down to talk at the same eye level as that person in the power chair. Or, my God, that's a giant power chair. Suzanne and maybe others saw what very few audiences see at the beginning. Even PT/OT speech, by the way. She said, hey, what's up with an ad for power wheelchairs that has stairs as a giant thing? And I have another, just a quick story. I was presenting this type of talk to a group of PT/OT speech folks, clinicians, and they were like, oh, wow, yeah, why would they do that? Why would they do that? And they do that because they don't have users in Permobile in positions of power. They talk to users, they may pay for users' equipment and call them brand ambassadors, but they just haven't had enough dinners with users to really realize that. So I'm talking like this, people are like, wow, I'm looking like a genius. They're like, wow, I've been a clinician. I saw it, but it didn't hit me until now. That's kind of weird. Why would they do that? And a person from Permobile walked into the back of the seminar room, a good friend of mine. And I said, hey, Jaime. Jaime's from Permobile. Everybody turned back to me. I said, what is this? And he said, oh, that's an advertisement for the Koala, big old 150-pound power chair for a 15, 20, 25-pound payload. So he's apologetic for the design, which they should be. It's weird. And I said, what strikes you from this ad? Nothing. And this guy hangs out with kids and families a lot. And I said, anything? And so I was looking at all the faces of the attendees, and they were mouth agape. And I know Jaime well enough to go like, stop. Jaime is a great person. He was totally confused. I'm like, Jaime, did you see the stairs? He's like, yeah. Does that say anything to you? No. Now, when I said, stairs are like the classic barrier, right? He's like, oh my gosh, how could I, what? So he got it once he got it. It was just a really great moment. It really helps me continue to recalibrate that we are all, if you're able-bodied, we are all that group. And Jaime we need reminders. When we get off here, we'll all go to lunch or the next thing, most of us walking, and it will be super easy. And it's just, able-bodied individuals trying to help in the disability community have to be led by users. So it's just a great example. And what comes out of that, keep an eye on this, what comes out of that user-directed process is a different device. This kind of device. Now that's a race car off the shelf. That's not a medical device, Cole, not necessarily. So let's talk a little bit about the ride-on cars, and we'll heading towards the end here.
The minute my wife and I walked in, we couldn't believe the enthusiasm, the excitement surrounding the cars, and of course the children was just unbelievable. A lot of smiles. I don't know that I've seen as many smiles in one place in a while. From children watching their cars be built to the volunteers who were building them, everybody had a smile on their face. Everybody was excited about the mission, and we're just happy to be part of it.
Okay, so that just showed you a snapshot of a industry manufacturing and distribution process, or a Go Baby Go workshop in Cleveland where therapists and community organizers and community participants came together and used some donor funding to buy cars and equipment and supplies and made cars for kids. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit and tell you that over the last 5 years, we've struggled with how to scale this. Back there. How to scale this from mom and pop builds, which have gotten us in 12 years about 10,000 cars. That's a lot of cars. Somewhere between 300,000 and 1.5 million kids per year in the U.S. alone need adaptive mobility. Do the math. We're not going to get there, right? There's no way. So how do you scale something? Now we've done our participatory action research. We've allowed a user-led, or at least it's not truly user-led, but it's user-informed and user-directed. And we've hit on something that gets used an hour or two a day in our research. So a little bit coercion, right? You've got to use this much, but an hour a day on average for 7 months to a year does lead to really good cognitive scores in babies with Down syndrome in the orange versus those that didn't get a car in the blue. So we feel like the use is up and we're doing what we need to do. So how do you scale this? This has been hard. One way we tried to scale is through STEM classrooms, middle school and high school. And so we did a Robert Wood Johnson funded curriculum, and we entered into the educational culture. And it has all the barriers of research, academic and medical, those rings. We added another ring called primary, secondary education. But it was a little bit easier in some ways, a little bit harder in other ways. So that's rocking and rolling, but we're not pumping out enough cars. And they're not, the cars themselves they're not always appropriate. Kids can't steer. We need micro switches. We need regular switches. We need zero turn radius proportional drive joysticks on cars. I'm going to save myself from continuing to do more slides and not take questions. I'm going to get out of this, just talk to you. So how do you scale? And this is happening right now. If you have any interns or any students that you would like to put on projects called How Go Baby Go Scales with Toyota, Mattel, and the smart factories of the next generation, give them a holler. They can follow along this process and learn. But what we're doing right now is, and the way this came about is interesting, but we don't have time to talk about it. I was going to say that we are partnering with Toyota and Mattel, Fisher-Price, and other universities that are Purdue University and some other universities on smart factories. And these are capitalizing on an academic need to train biomedical and other types of engineers in more than just design, but to arc this all the way through to delivery and distribution. Supply chain silliness we all know about now post-pandemic. That has really influenced engineering thinking in terms of academic to really go beyond hackathons or maker spaces and arc all the way to selling products, or at least to the distribution of products. And so there's a potential that we would basically have an academic industry factory, if you will, with Fisher-Price and Mattel, who know a lot about babies and toy regulations, and with Toyota that knows a lot about mobility and process. The Toyota process of having small Tundras and Tacomas come off the line can be used for big girl Tundras and Tacomas to come off the line. Can be the exact process for the smaller toys. And so that's looks to be how we're going to try to scale, is to combine the best of STEM education, middle, high school, college. And by education, I mean all the STEM and STEAM participants, the healthcare related students, the engineering related students, the finance related students, the behavioral economic students. So it's going to be a really interesting next couple of years to take this across college, across universities, and partner to roll out more technology. Why is this not FDA generated, insurance funded? Is because that within the system, which I've been watching for 12 years, I can't see how we can do that. The system around pediatric and adult powered wheelchairs, powered mobility devices is so locked down. I think this is accurate to just say this, that it's very much like a cartel. Most of these companies are owned by private equity. If you don't know private equity in healthcare, that's a Google rabbit hole to go down. Be ready, be well fueled, have a margarita beside you, because it's going to get dark very quick when you talk about private equity and healthcare. And private equity has come to my neighborhood in power wheelchairs and powered mobility. And so within the system, we just can't figure out a way to make it work. We see lots of innovation come and die there. So we're working outside the system. And that's sort of another sort of take home, I think, for all of us is, yes, you have academic, medical, and research cultures. Is there a community-based culture? For me, it was the mobility of toys and the mobility of large cars and automotive. In a strange way, electric cars, both big cars and electric toys, have a synergy. I never would have expected that. So let me just end there, and we can talk a little bit more if you have specific questions. But I wanted to give you a snapshot of how we've gone from sort of design, attempting as best we could, and then really understanding we have to do better of getting the user into every one of those pieces. We could have saved ourselves a lot of heartache 12 years ago if we simply understood the justice and equity elements that were needed, and it really was involving kids and families from the beginning at every process. And we've ended up with technologies that now are relatively low cost, including our harness systems, and are utilized tremendously. We're about to publish on a very complex medical population using our portable harnesses, or using some portable harnesses that are FDA approved. But because they came up through a user-based process, we're getting potentially 2 and 3 hours on average of use of these devices for participation and impairment and function, whereas the typical home program in the same field is 15 minutes 3 times a day, 3 times a week. So we're feeling good about that. I'm resting better because I'm spending more time with users and they're directing that. So let me stop there and thank the organizers again for simply thinking of inviting me. This has been a real treat to work these ideas out in front of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Galloway. This is so inspiring. Any question? Yeah.
I have a question. Thanks, Cole. I've followed your work since I was at UD. I love it. Um, have you talk about advocacy and kind of including individuals and caregivers with disabilities. Um, have you coupled the use of your mobility with any kind of education or inclusion type of education with the teachers and other kids that are in the classrooms, um, where these kids are placed? Because it's not just about bringing the kid, into that environment, but having the environment adapt or fully include that kid as a partner, an equal. You mentioned friendship as a true friend, not someone they pity or look down upon, but as a friend.
Well, that's just a little short course right there for Mia. I mean, that's, did I say pity friend? Because I think about it all the time. I don't think I said it in this one. So pity friend, you guys, is a jargon term because everybody uses it. Pity friend is derogatory, and I use it all the time because it signals the high bar that friendships are. And everything, yes, to everything you said. And what we're finding is, of course, who we include at every step has to be all the monkeys in the jungle. Because if you work in peds, it's never the kids. It's those 400-month-olds that drive you crazy. If you're an early educator, it's never the kids. It's the 400-month-old parents and administrators. So including everyone and anyone all the time. And it sounds so simple. Your grandma would go, well, of course you're going to include anyone that's involved in any aspect of home care or community. If you're going to build a church, you're going to involve everybody. Yes, it's just slow for us. I don't know if it's expert culture. I think it is the types of buildings and the places we come into. No one here typically goes. We all are more in our living rooms now, so we do have maybe a more appreciation of like home isn't everything. I think we all realize home can drive you a little bit batty, but nobody's rushing back to work full time. They're like, I'd like to have the option. Yeah, that's it. These spaces are important. Our mobility options are important. So sure, you better involve, if it's a kiddo, you better involve every adult of any aspect you can think of. And especially, it's my principle sort of including people in meetings that have no business there. That's Martha Hall as a fashion designing master's student, bringing the, speaking truth to power kind of, and bringing the shit hammer down on me of why would you even put people in that you wouldn't be caught dead in. And it was a corner I could never get out of. And I will say I'm pretty hard on institutions. Institutions have a long history. We all know it. And for folks like me, white guys, hetero, cisgendered, privileged, we have a lot to learn. We created systems that are very, very resilient in themselves to change. But I think like the individuals, clinicians, academic, designers, you're doing the best you can. You're just in the wrong environment and it's the wrong culture. And especially in healthcare, I get told, oh my gosh, you guys are all in healthcare or around it. So I can tell you, you may have had this. In my DEI circles, my disability, diversity, equity, inclusion types of circles, more and more I'm being told, yeah, I know we talked about corporate issues, but Cole's in healthcare, and you're just so lucky because there's just no DEI issues in healthcare. And I'm like, after the second or third time, I'm like, stop. Where are you listening to this? Like, who's saying what podcast of knuckleheads? Is that a bunch of white guys talking? Is it a bunch of CEOs? What? Who at Kaiser Permanente or Medicare Medicaid is having this new Netflix special saying that healthcare is this utopia of, it's whatever the user wants. It's like everyone in healthcare more than a minute realizes the user's not even in this discussion. We're not inviting the user to any of the power moves. So, but on the flip side, when people ask, like, what's the real thing I can do? Include the user. What am I doing giving this talk without a user co-authoring it or giving it? Is because I needed to justify in my head that I knew a little bit more about medical academic. I could translate some things. Anything above that, like if this was really about how caregivers go about doing this, that, and the other, it has to be co-taught or I support that caregiver. And so elevating caregivers and individuals into positions of power, and it's so easy if you're a PI to speak to another PI and go, for the PIs that are on the call, why do you lead a disability-related lab if you do not have a disability? No one in their right mind is going to let me lead a Center for Black Culture, a white guy, but it's as if for 25 years I ran a Center for Mobility with no one. That's like me running a Center for Women's Studies and me running it, but worse, I never hired a woman, volunteer through postdoc or visiting faculty. But disability, as many of you know that work in disability, it's the hidden marginalization and oppressed population. It's always the last thing we really talk about. So, wow, I built that platform and jumped up high. Sorry about that, but it's constant in healthcare. The latest thing is this healthcare being, different than corporate, different than policing. We can defund police, but healthcare is sacrosanct and it's doing fine. No, it's not doing fine. And when you spend, the biggest thing I would also say the change in me, and some of you on the call have seen me along the way, I'm very different than 2 years ago simply because I travel to New York City more often, Hudson Valley and Brooklyn, and have sensible dinners and friendships with people that have to beg, fight, and plead for the basics so much that I get so ashamed of so many things that I used to feel good about. And it's turned me around. It's really helped. So I'm hoping maybe I brought a little bit of that tingle to you. If you want to know anything more about this, I'm certainly not an expert on much of this, but reach out and I'll find you people that can talk more.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a quick question. Hi, my name is Mina. Well, thank you so much for the talk. It was really interesting. And as a former Boilermaker, I'm happy you're working with Purdue University. I was thinking about scalability. And so when you give these cars to families, do they use them for, for how long can they use them? Do they bring them back so other people can use them?
Yes. Yep. So that kind of loaner library is what most communities do. So you come and bring it, and it's kind of like you come to my beach house, and if you break something, you fix it, and we keep going from there. So people return them. That kind of rental aspect, Medicare, Medicaid would lose its mind. If somebody was on here, they'd be like, don't even talk to me about rental, because they don't even want to hear that the iPad is something. They want to pay $5,000 to $7,000 for a speech communication. If we have SLPs or other people in communication, they're about to lose their mind because there's no funded iPad, because they can't figure out how to participate in a modern life where kids could use a Jeep for 2 or 3 years. We've all seen them. I mean, most of us gave them to cousins who gave them to cousins. You see them all the time in garage sales. They last forever. Unfortunately, that plastic is never going away. But to formalize that, there's such a legal barrier to, no, if it's rent, you can't return things. So, we get returns all the time, and we get sharing. So neighbors need one, and they pass it along, and they modify it. So that's all available. That's not a thing that's in durable medical equipment, especially like power wheelchairs, for example, even though it could be. So, for example, when your power wheelchair breaks, until it is fixed, you are immobile. Oh, well, that's cool. Can you fund a used chair as my secondary backup? For what use? For in-home, and I need to get to my my job outside of the home. Don't say outside the home. It's not funded. And used chairs as a backup, that's not a thing. And so when you really dig into the policy, you see, like, who made this? Well, people that don't use the technology. Because if you used it, if you needed a catheter to empty your bladder, you would never make a policy that limited people to a certain number of catheters per month. I don't know about you. I love to pee, and I love peeing a lot. It's super cool. And I don't want to be restricted to 40 to 60 pees per month. Some of my friends in Brooklyn, I'm like, you're kidding me. That's not a thing. And they go, oh, yeah, you guys did it. You healthcare people that love us so much. How about stop loving us so much? Yeah, I have friends that 40 to 50 catheters per month. Well, what do you do when you run out? So what do you do? Well, I just have UTIs because I just have to sort of just titrate it out, just bargain it out. Really? Yeah. So I thought I knew. Boy, I thought, full professor, I know the pipeline. I didn't know jack shit. I didn't know anything, even in the area that I would have told you. And I think Suzanne was on here, Milburn. Hello. Um, she's seen me for a lot of years, and for so many of those, people talk about, oh, impact. And now, the last couple of years, I've realized that we need to talk about like actual lived experience. If you're a junior professor or associate or a clinician that's trying to go up the chain, promotion and tenure does not reward you getting access to lived experiences. I'm working with the Cleveland Clinic. It is taking an act of Congress for families of neurotypical kids to come into Cleveland Clinic to play with our kids on a play group in a playground that they have on campus. They can envision how to do that. You just sit there going, what? We don't know. They may, the legal aspects, blah, blah, blah. So that not participating in this is a bare minimum, and then fighting this, but realizing also, like in academics, there is a downside. So I know we're getting to the end, and let people know, I won't worry if you'll reach out to me if you have questions or need contacts or have insights. Just being given a platform to be able to throw these kinds of things out. And also, check out the disability justice principles. They'll push you. They'll push you a little bit. And if you don't understand, for example, the anti-capitalist principle, if you think like that doesn't ring true, dig a little deeper. Dig a little deeper. Grab a margarita, and then dig a little deeper. First, grab your beer, margarita, and then dig.
Thank you so much. Oops. I have a quick question before we end. Yeah. I know it's already one, but so to scale up, the little cars. I mean, you have this association with Toyota and Playmobil, but then how are the cars distributed? Do you count on the Go Baby Go chapters around the countries to provide these cars to the kids, or how does it work?
What we would need is, 5,000 centers around the country that could be community distribution centers. And we have those. Now, I don't have any money for distribution or manufacturing or anything, but Toyota has about 5,000 dealerships. And those dealerships want to hand out as many little baby Toyota Tacomas as they can get their hands on because of what it says to the community about that dealership, the PR and the media and the community connection. You won't be able to get that kind of innovation, that innovative thought, without partnering outside medical research and academics. It's out here in the Toyota space for Toyota to go, oh, you build cars? The Toyota dealerships will absolutely do it. Toyota domestic headquarters in Plano, Texas, basically has told Toyota, don't give out any more cars right now until we get all the legal stuff handled. The Toyota dealerships went, no, thank you. We're good. We'll distribute the cars, and you guys figure out whatever you're figuring out. It's too easy for the Baltimore Toyota dealerships to connect with their community and show in one 30-second clip who they really are, which is, I love our community and I want to give back. So I love taking a step back and watching that power shift, not coming from me begging, but within that system.
Right. Oh, that's so neat. Yeah, that's really impressive.
Yeah, and that wasn't me. That was in a meeting where people went, oh, distribution, the dealerships do not listen to domestic headquarters. They listen to their community. And I'm like, ooh, great.
And that is being done like right now. These are distributed. Oh, neat. Right. All right. Well, thank you so much again. This was extremely
Thank you
inspiring,
guys.
and I'm going to look at